Here we go. Hi, Wime. How do you say your name? I hope I'm saying that right. Wham?
Oh,
Wham?
it's a nickname, Wayne James. So it's
Wayne
just a
Jane.
nickname. Yeah, thank
Hi. Oh,
you.
we've got Patricia joining us. Hi, Whitney, Andrea, and Sarah. And of course, Peter Howard is our Dr. Compost. We should probably
Oh
change
yeah,
that
I've
name.
got my official.
Dr. Compost there. Thanks
I'm
for
Dr.
joining us.
Compost.
It's
Yeah.
always great to see some other faces apart from ours. So look, we've got some questions here, but before I go into the Grow Hub questions, because you are all here, I just wanted to check if you've got any questions, please either raise your hand or unmute now and ask a question, or you can pop it into the chat. Oh, hey, Monica, you're here. Great. Why don't we start with you?
Yeah, go ahead, Catherine, and read her question if you don't mind. Or if
Oh, is one of her questions in the...
I have another question too.
Oh,
okay.
okay. All right. So
Well,
let's...
since you're here, why don't you go ahead and ask them, Monica?
So I forgot the one I asked, but anyhow, I'm setting up my Subpod. So that's
Yeah.
really nice. I've got enough dirt in it now to go to the bottom of the first wormhole. That's a lot of dirt. That's what I did today. But my question is,
Wait. Sorry, just before you go on, you're talking about inside the subpod. You're talking about that's compost, or is that dirt?
it's dirt, not
Oh,
inside the Subpod, around
okay.
it.
Aha. Okay. Great.
So
Okay.
my question is just garden dirt okay, or should I have special dirt?
No, around the outside of the subpod, garden dirt is just fine. So
Okay.
generally, the best soil that's good for plants will be just ideal for the subpod as well.
Okay, good. All right.
I just wanted to check though, is it in a raised garden bed or is it in the ground?
It's raised.
Great.
It's the metal. It's the one that you get with the Subpod Mini. It's the metal one.
No, that's going to be ideal for you. That's great.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, if you remember your other question, but we'll go through the questions that were put on the board in advance, and so
I think
it'll
I
come
just
up.
said I was getting ready to do my put it together and get it going.
Okay. Okay.
Right. Well, look, we've got Whitney here. I'm going to start with Whitney's, I don't know if it's the same Whitney Berger from Grow Hub, who's here with us in the room. But the question from Whitney is that she has 5 gallons of compost using Bokashi from this winter. How soon can I add all of it to the Subpod?
Yeah, so what I recommend is Bokashi is great as a sort of a pre-digesting process for the worms, but it can be a little on the acidic side. And so the easy thing is if you have a little baking soda, so bicarbonate of soda, not baking powder, but baking soda, that'll bring the pH up a little bit. So if you scattered, say, a few tablespoons of that into the 5 gallons, mixed it through, then I would add 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 with each feeding. So you can be a bit more generous because it's a bit pre-digested as long as you've brought the pH up. So that should work just fine. Are your worms, they were overwintering, or what's the state of the worms? I don't know if you're comfortable in replying to that. Since you're here, I could say a bit more if you know how to unmute yourself there. Maybe not.
Maybe that's,
Okay.
I don't know if that's the same Whitney, but anyway, I'll
Okay.
ask you to unmute if she comes on. But we've got the Whammo Jammo. We've got a couple of questions from,
Okay.
we've got the first one is, my Subpod will go into a 31-inch tall metal garden bed, and I'm building a, how do you say that? The hugelkultur,
Yes.
hugelkultur method, which is 1 layers of is decomposed food scraps, and I'm wondering if this would mean the worms will head there and not stay in the Subpod.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Normally, the deeper layers of hugelkultur are woody scraps, woody branch material, and those are favored by earthworms rather than compost worms. So normally, the compost worms prefer softer foods. They'll go after food scraps and leaves and things like that. So they wouldn't be that drawn to the decomposing wood at all. So ideally, you'll have a complete ecosystem of the earthworms, which do their part deeper in the soil, and your compost worms, which hang out on the upper surfaces.
Okay, and so thank you for that. What then maybe I'm not understanding, because the way it said was, your thicker log-like, then you could have branches and stuff, and then it says decomposing food.
Yes.
Then you go into your better soil sort of thing. So it was the decomposing layer that I thought that's going to be close enough to the subpod that I thought, oh, I'm going to lose them. They're going to head on out.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I've not heard of people adding the decomposing food on top. I would hold off on that to be on the safe side, because you'll still get the hugelkultur just fine with that progression of heavier to lighter materials.
Okay, perfect. And part of this was it's a metal bin, 31 high. So I'm not, this is a part of my aging process. And so I'm thinking about 30 years from now, I don't want to bend down to the ground. So I was trying to fill that in particular, but it was that one layer that I'm like, oh God, I think I'm going to lose them all. They're going to go hang out there.
Yeah.
So, okay.
It's good you thought that through, because 31 inches isn't all that deep. And so by the time you put in some woody material at the bottom, you're going to need all of that for the plants that's above that. And so it's probably better to go straight from the bit of woody material, maybe 10 centimeters or so, and then soil above that would be
perfect.
Now, the one thing to caution you is that as that woody stuff decomposes, the soil level will drop over time, so you will have to add more soil.
Yeah, and then I think so. Thank you for that too. I think the fact that the subpod is at the height, it's going to be a lift over, fill up, put back in. So that's, again, I think it's going to be a, if and when that starts to happen, sort of thing. So I had a second part. Do you want me to continue, or do you want to?
Sure, okay, absolutely.
Yeah. So again, so the bed is going to be big enough for the subpod, and then also some plants. I'm going to plan this to be my herb garden. So I live in Northern California, drought, want to go up on drip irrigation. What will that do with the bed being shared by plants, drip irrigation, and the subpod?
It should be fine. Basically, what I would recommend is that you just have a bit of a gap between the drip line itself and the walls of the subpod.
Okay.
I think what could work well is if you have plants really budding right up against subpod, because what'll happen is their feeder roots will actually work their way in through the walls, which is fine. And then if you put the drip line just on the outside of that, that should be safe.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
I just wasn't sure, just to clarify what you were talking about, raising the subpod in and putting in the bed. You only have to do that one time when you're planting the subpod in, right? Just
but the comment that you made, that as the years go on and the bottom does start to go down, it just feels like I'm right at a height that I'm right there with the subpot, not bending down and over. And that's what I meant there. And I don't know if that's nowhere in the literature it does talk about it eventually will go, but is that 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? I just don't know on that one. So.
It'll depend on how much moisture is in your mound, because that's the speed of decomposition. So temperature and moisture will dictate that. And then with 31 centimeters, you'll be able to put that subpod right at the very bottom of the bed. So I wouldn't put woody material under the subpod. I just plant that in the bottom and surround the bottom.
So apologies. I'm in the United States, where we use inches and feet. This is a very high raised bed. This is 31 inches.
Oh, okay.
So it's right here where I'm not having to bend down to the ground.
I fully understand.
So it will. I do have wood, woody on the bottom.
Yes.
But you're right. The earth, how much dirt and earth and that sort of thing. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing tomorrow. That's why this.
So this just a final thing, just for you to think about, is you could consider putting the subpod on pavers, so that doesn't change the height over time, and let the wood level drop around it. Then you'd never have to move the subpod at all.
Okay.
Just just as a possibility.
Yeah, I also suggest that because sometimes the soil as well as the wood can move around, and then
Right.
it puts the subpod sort of on a tilt, and then the lid mightn't close so well. So I always suggest a really good solid base to plant your subpod on top of.
Okay.
You know, especially if you've got a dry environment, that it'll get wet and then dry and then wet and then dry, and
Okay.
it
Well, you
can move around a
completely
bit.
changed my tomorrow now.
Okay. Hopefully you can find something that will not break down. You can put below it. That's
Oh,
bricks or pavers would be
I
good
have bricks, I
choices.
have pavers, no
Perfect.
worries on that one, no worries on that one.
Perfect.
And a
Okay,
good
Okay.
level, I always have a level that when I plant a subpod, I put my level on top just to make sure that I've, got it leveling nicely.
okay,
This also
Yeah.
helps.
And
Okay.
This is
and
what,
and and one last tip
Huh?
that's part of that whole conversation is make sure the lid is closed on the subpod to keep it trued up on the side, because people make the mistake, if the lid is open, it can be slightly out of true, and then it has a harder time closing. So,
okay,
okay,
perfect. Thank you so much.
right, sure.
Great. Now, look, Andrea's just popped a question into the chat.
Okay.
In setting the pod up initially, how deep should the cardboard, paper, and coir and leaves be? That means her bedding material.
Yes. So the good news is there's no such thing as too much, really. It's if by providing a bit of extra bedding, you'll end up just creating a better habitat for the worms. It'll provide more buffering for moisture and all that. When I say that, I'm especially in favor of more of the coconut coir, because it has the virtue of being fibrous, and so it'll bring in air as well as holding a lot of moisture, which is ideal for the worms. They like a combination of moist and airy. So if you had the chance of, say, a couple of, I don't know if you have the classic or the mini, but if you had a classic, you can do at least one of those compressed bricks of coir for each chamber, and then a little bit of other carbons you can add in here and there. If you add too much shredded newspaper, it can glop up into a mound, and that's not so good because it doesn't let the air in as well. But one of the advantages of adding extra carbon in the beginning is that you don't have to be adding carbon with every feed. You can know that there's extra carbon in there that worms can work with. So you're preloading carbon by adding a bit extra bedding in the beginning.
Right, and
So,
we've got Whitney joining us. Thanks for that. Hope that helped, Andrea. Whitney, did you have a question that you wanted to ask directly, or are you just showing your lovely face? You can't
oh,
mute.
you're muted. You'll have to unmute yourself there.
Oh, okay. So yeah, if there's anything you
Oh,
want to ask, pop it into the chat. But
she did. It seemed like it briefly unmuted, but I couldn't see. Can
let me
you
see if
unmute
I can.
her?
Maybe I can. I've asked her to unmute. Ask to unmute, but
Oh,
you haven't clicked anywhere. Anyway, we've
okay.
got another question here from Mindy. Oh, we're getting questions coming in the chat here. We're going to have to keep moving because we've got quite a few questions. So excuse me, everyone, for just keeping things moving.
So Elka had a question I saw that came up as a chat. Should we answer that
There's
next?
one before her, but we'll start with Elka then. What effect do ants have in the subpod? The other day there was white eggs and then a whole lot of ants moving them. And that relates to another question we've got from Eric about
Everybody, thanks.
Hi. Okay. So yeah, what I would recommend is not let the ants take up residence in there. And so when I've seen them try to colonize my subpod, I'll clear the eggs out and let them know that they're not welcome. Generally speaking, you can keep them out if you create a moist enough environment, because they like drier conditions. And so if you keep the worm blanket wet, that generally discourages them. Yeah, I mean, they're not going to directly hurt the worms, but it's just not great having them wandering through all of your food scraps.
Yeah, I tried to remove the clumps of them, and then I noticed yesterday they were virtually gone. So I must have quite a lot of liquid in there. It must be quite a moist environment for, as you said, they don't like that. So I'll keep a note of that and make sure that it's wetter than dry.
Yeah, now the last part of that, if they're persistent, you can make up a little saucer that's 50% boric acid. So you can buy borax from a local co-op or cleaning supply, and then 50% sugar with that, and put
Right.
that in a little saucer on top of the worm blanket. And what they'll do is they'll feed on that, and that'll stop them in their tracks.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Mhm.
I'll do that.
Right. Wonderful. Thanks for coming on and asking. We've also got here from Mindy Borer. After harvesting compost out of the Subpod, should I add more cardboard / Coir, etc.? Bedding material, basically.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Provide them with fresh bedding to start them off, because you'll have quite a nice population of worms after separating the castings. And so you'll want to provide good bedding for them so they can thrive in their new freshly cleaned out Subpod chamber. So again, I recommend the coconut coir if you have access to that. It's a good choice.
Great. And Monica just said that she ended up with 2 pavers side by side and another layer of the same on top. This got the Subpod mini to the right height, and it was level. So that's great to hear.
Perfect. Great. Great.
All right, so I'm going to head into the questions that we've got here on Grow Hub. The Eric one, did you think the ant one you've answered enough there, Peter, about behind the foam? He said he was having
well, I'll just say a bit more about that. So there's a possibility that one of our Grow Hub members, Eric, had ants that actually found their way into the foam behind the lid. And so we've created a version of that where you have 4 brown plastic plugs that you can actually remove, and that'll pull that whole silver sheet out of the lid, and then you can wash it out and then put plugs and the silver sheet back in and clean it out. And that should work well for him if he has additional questions about that. But again, it's the same trick with the 50% borax and sugar. They'll actually probably climb out of the foam, feed on that, and that'll take care of them.
Great.
And by the way,
Okay.
that doesn't hurt the worms at all, which is why we're proposing that as a choice.
Right. Great. Wonderful. And look, Whitney was just asking how much coir peat to add to a new system. She's starting with 500 worms, which is not a lot of worms, but as you were saying, it doesn't matter. You can add as much coir peat as you can, get hold
Yeah,
of.
I would. Does Whitney have a single a classic, or does she have a mini?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If it's in a mini, then I mean those blocks usually go to about a 9-litre bucket, don't they? So
Yeah.
you put probably half
I would do a whole
block.
brick. Yeah.
She's got a classic. Okay. And maybe with 500 worms, maybe just start on one side.
Definitely. With 500 worms, only put them all into one side and not the other side.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is probably blend up the food scraps in the beginning so that you spread. What you're doing by blending them up is you're creating a lot more surface area in the food, so it'll break down faster. It'll grow up your population of microbes quicker, and the worms are mostly eating the microbes rather than the food scraps. That's their main diet. They actually will ingest the food scraps to break them up, but they're providing that as food material for the bacteria that is their main food source.
Right, that's interesting, because I know that we used to say don't feed worms, for the first week, but I kind of feel really sorry for the worms that they're going to be hungry.
This is the virtue of blending them. So by blending the food scraps and spreading it through the bedding, even if the worms aren't eating the first few days, there's no risk of that food festering because you've distributed it through the bedding, and it'll break down in contact with lots of air and moisture. So the worms will get to it when they're ready for it.
Yeah, and you can blend the Bokashi scraps as well. That's fine. And then the koi peat goes in moist. You put it into a bucket,
Yes,
rehydrate
for sure.
it, and it becomes like damp sawdust consistency.
Yeah, they have directions usually on the bricks you can buy of coconut coir, and just follow their guidance. But basically we have the squeeze test, as Catherine's saying, damp sawdust. If you gave a squeeze of the bedding once you've hydrated it, if it's dripping water, that's a bit too wet. If it's just nicely damp, that's ideal. So you can be testing as you're adding water and adjust by adding a bit more dry if you overdo it. But again, if you add a bit more water, then just drain it a bit before you add it to the Subpod, and that'll be fine. Okay.
Great. Wonderful. Now, Andrea has also got another question about how deep, that one we've already answered, really, how deep the bedding material should be. I've got one here from Penny from the Grow Hub, which is I use newspaper in my Subpod every time I add scraps, and it always ends up in soggy lumps, no matter how I tear it. Any suggestions?
Yes. So if you're adding newspaper as your primary carbon source, what I would recommend is order of addition is first add your food scraps, then scatter the shredded newspaper over the whole surface of the food scraps and mix that in. So you're minimizing clumping a lot of paper in one section as it wets down. And that way you might have a few small lumps, but they'll break down quickly. And it's good to mix different carbon sources, but that newspaper will be fine for them too. If there's tiny clumps, that's not a problem. If you find some clumps, just be willing to pull them apart and spread them out when you go for the next feed.
Great.
But yeah, just avoid wetting them before you add them and mixing them in. That should help a lot.
Yeah, I've often seen, like I use a paper shredder to shred my newspaper, and I find that gets a bit caught up and stuff. And I noticed someone, it was a great little post I saw, people just tearing, obviously got their kids there to tear them up into just little pieces. And
Confetti.
I thought that would probably be great because it wouldn't get caught up in the aerator as much. So again, the smaller the particles, a bit like the Coir peat, the more it's going to create more air pockets and be able to be, composted quicker, isn't it? Rather than turning into clumpiness. So
yeah, and it's probably better not to add too much of it all at once. So if you add a little bit and spread it around, add a bit more with the next feed, that'll be fine. Just avoid the temptation of adding in, an entire waste basket full of shredded paper at one time.
great. And look, we're on to the Mindy Bora's question about planting the cover crop over winter. And not sure what to do now. It's ready to add to my first compost harvest from Subpod and start planting. So have you got
Yes. So Mindy, would you be able to unmute yourself? Because I had a couple questions for you about your green manure crops. For people who don't know, green manures. Oh, hi. So the thing, green manures are great because the roots will actually be feeding the microbes in the soil, and you'll be adding some nitrogen to the soil. Did you happen to know if you have seeds that are part of that green manure cover crop or not?
I don't know. I don't think so. I planted peas and fava.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Okay, so have those cover crops died down at this point, or are they just dry material lying on the surface?
Well, I think I read somewhere that you should just cut them off
Yes.
before they start to flower. So I've done that.
Yes. Oh,
and-
you're all over it. That's
But I don't,
fantastic.
I don't know what to do next. Do
Okay,
I leave
so
them on? Do I leave them on the ground? Or do I?
Here's what I recommend. So are you putting seedlings into the bed, or are you direct sowing seeds into the bed when you plant?
I do some of both.
Okay. So what I'd recommend is you can scatter some of the Subpod compost amongst the cover crop that's now lying on the ground and dried, and then just dig all that in a little bit into the top surface of the soil. Just work it in a little bit. And then for the seedlings, you can take a handful of the Subpod compost and plant it right with the seedlings, so the roots have contact with the compost.
Okay.
And that should work well. And then you want to make sure to cover the bed afterwards with some nice mulch.
Oh, okay. Can I use leaves for the mulch, like leaves that I raked up earlier in the?
Yeah, if you've raked them up earlier and they've started to rot down a bit or crumbled up. The thing is, if they're fairly fresh, they can actually prevent water from reaching the soil if it rains. So if they're
Okay.
starting to break down, they're going to be good. But
Okay.
you, as a mulch choice, you want something that both shields the surface of the soil from the sun and keeps it from drying too quickly, but will allow water to penetrate when it rains or when you're watering, if you're watering from
Okay,
the top.
right. So I'd leave what I cut off just on the ground, let it kind of dry, and then I can
Yeah.
add some compost and then plant.
And then work it into the soil.
Work
and
it in a little
plant.
bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I
Perfect.
have a few little shoots that are coming back up. Do I just chop those down again?
Oh, unless you want to see how the fava beans and your
Peas.
legumes are going to do in the bed, if that's
Okay.
interesting.
I could leave some and let them just see what happens. Okay.
Yeah. So maybe provide a little trellis for them or something as they come up and
Uh-huh.
see how they go.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Sure.
Great. Now, Sarah Huntington had a question saying that my worms don't seem to work very quickly. Should I let them break everything down completely before adding more?
Yes, as a general rule of thumb, you don't want to overfeed in the beginning. When you're first starting out with the worms, you don't have a lot of worms. They're dividing roughly every 6 weeks. You're getting kind of a population increase. And what I recommend in the beginning is if you chop up your food scraps finely or blend them up, like I was saying before, it'll create maximum surface area. So you'll provide the highest concentration of microbes, and it'll readily provide food for the worms to grow as quickly as they can. What you'll find in the beginning is that you'll have to feed a little bit less, like our feeding directions, a handful of food, and then watch and see most of that's disappeared, and then you add a bit more. You don't have to wait until it's entirely gone, but what you're doing is avoiding adding so much that it starts to go anaerobic and smelly, and you want to avoid that. So just pay attention as you add, wait, add a bit more. But ideally, you could be adding every 3 days or so, and if you're adding small amounts.
Yeah, well, that sort of leads on to the next question that we've got from James, saying that he can follow the instructions to a T for my raised bed subpod, but all of my worms seem to have migrated into the raised bed or beyond. I can't see a single worm in my compost, just coir peat and a small amount of food scraps. What can I do to entice the worms back?
So this can happen if you've done a really great job of amending the garden soil around the subpod and putting in some animal manure like cow manure or horse manure. That's one of their favorite foods. And so they'll actually go in search of that because it has so many microbes around it. So one way to entice them back is if you have access to a little bit of cow manure or horse manure, put that in the subpod and you'll draw them back that way. If you don't have that as a food source, another thing that worm growers use to pull the worms into one location is make a slurry of wheat flour. So you take a little bit of flour, add some water, so it's pourable, and then you can sort of drip that into the bedding near the walls so that you can draw the worms back that way. But the good news is because they're in a raised bed, the worms are still there. They're just needing to be enticed back.
Great. Now, look, Robin's just joined us. Robin, welcome. If you've got any questions, you can pop them into the chat. I've gone through all of the ones that were posted into the Grow Hub, so we're up for any other questions that anyone might want to contribute right now. And then there was just another little question there from Whitney about, how she's got the Subpod Classic. She was going to put her 500 worms and bedding on one side, and then she was asking, does she leave the other side empty or does she put bedding there as well?
I would put bedding there as well. Yeah, because by putting bedding there as well, you'll actually provide a reservoir of moisture that'll keep the first bedding from drying out so much. And then the worms probably in the beginning won't be migrating that far to the other chamber, especially if you're adding food into the first chamber. There wouldn't be any reason for them to leave. And eventually, when you see the numbers building up in that first side, you can start adding to both sides.
Great. Wonderful. Okay.
Now,
Now,
were there any more in the chats? Let's see.
yeah, I thought I went through just about everyone in the chat there. If anyone else has another question, please either unmute yourself or pop it into the chat. We've got a couple more minutes before we close the room.
It looks yeah, it looks like oh, I see. You've provided Elka with some videos to get started. She was asking.
No, I think she's just said that she's got some great videos.
Oh, you
We
have
have
great
some great
videos.
videos.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
We
the
tried to
sub,
cover.
when I first got the Subpod, I got some emailed all your getting started videos, and they were fantastic. Really
Okay.
helpful. I could watch them over and over again, and yeah, really good and very helpful to get started.
Oh,
Great.
great to
That's
hear.
good feedback. Thanks for that.
Yeah, we tried to cover everything that we could think of, and of course, the more we get people giving us feedback about what they need help with, we can keep adding to that bank of videos. Particularly, like the Grow Hub's our place to try and make sure that we put a lot of these resources. So, I mean, it's funny how many people don't watch the videos.
Well, and this is nice having this once a week for you guys, so that if there's any unanswered questions, we're here as a resource for you to be able to provide answers in real time, make sure you're staying on track. And it's usually the beginning when you're first setting up your system that you have the most questions, and after a while you'll get a feel for things, you'll have a lot of experience, the worm population will have built up, and you'll be really amazed eventually how resilient the worm population is once it's been going for 6 months or more. They're quite they're quite adaptable. They're a great example in nature where they only divide to match their food supply, so they never outstrip the amount of food that's provided, unlike a lot of other species that will just keep dividing endlessly and then crash the population. So that's good news for all of us composting with worms. Oh, yep. Ryan, go ahead.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's just kind of a general question. It's going to be me, and I have a friend who rents my converted garage. I don't
Okay.
know her food waste. I kind of know mine. So I'd hate to run out of food, but what do you do with more food? And so is there just a good starting point with, okay, from this point on, I'm going to get the worms in 2 weeks. I don't feed them for 1 week, but from this point on, let me start putting things in a Ziploc bag in the refrigerator. I mean, is there a good starting place for making sure there's food for them?
Yeah, well, I would actually, even if you're getting the worms, especially if they're being shipped, they can be pretty hungry when they arrive. I think the original directions we had about waiting a week was when people have worms that are fresh from a local area, and oftentimes people are getting them mailed, or they're getting them in a shop where they haven't been fed for a while and they're hungry. So if that's the case for you, I would go ahead and feed them. They may not eat for a day or two, but then after that they'll be grateful for the food. And just start off with soft foods. You're asking if you have extra that you can't use right away and what to do with that. Is that your question?
Yeah, I mean, so again, just trying to get until we have a groove going here.
Yes.
Do I just, I filled a bin, but boy, it looks like they have enough food. Let me just set that aside, or should I put it in the refrigerator, or do they care if it's in the refrigerator?
Yeah, they don't actually.
Okay.
What'll happen is in the beginning you only be able to add a handful or two, depending on how many worms you're getting, and so you'll have a bit more than you can give them. Now, if you do want to do Bokashi composting in the beginning, you don't have to get the fancy Bokashi system. Really, all you need are the grains. So you could be scattering that into your kitchen caddy, and for the first month or two, while the Subpod's still building up the worm stock, you can just bury that in the soil in your garden. You can just dig a hole and take that Bokashi. And I know I have a friend here who swears by that as a technique, as an alternative. So if you have too much food, that's a good strategy. And then it'll take it, because that's an anaerobic process that would take a bit longer. for results, but it's certainly another, if you're okay with digging holes here and there in your.
Yeah. Like I said, I mean, I know this is trial and error. I know it's trying to figure things out. I get all that, but I'm also, my personality is one that I want rules and I want checklists and I want to know that
Yeah.
I'm doing all of that sort of thing. So it's kind of like, well, I don't even have a clue how much waste she has, and how much waste am I going to have? And,
Yes.
so it's just trying to figure that part out. I have been watching Compostable Kate, and in between my laughing, I see that she's got an aero bin. That's another alternative, is to run a hot compost independent of. And I know that she does berry. So I, just trying to kind of put all the, and she does the Bokashi too. But then I also freak when it says, well, don't put a lot in with the worms. Well, what's a lot? And so just again, trying to put the pieces together and just not sure.
Yeah, it's better to err on the side of not too much in the beginning. So a handful of food is ample for 1,000 worms or less. Hey, just out of curiosity, I used to live in Northern California. I'm curious, what part are you living in?
Yeah, so I'm San Jose, California. So San Jose in the Santa Clara there, and and we're on. Long story short, I just got about a 1,500 square foot garden beds. Want to be composting. We're just, life here is just getting harder and harder, as you know. And of course, now with all the water drought, and we're on mandatory shortage and all this sort of stuff. So just trying to piece it together and feel good and do the right thing and feed my garden and not have to go out there in the world.
Yes.
My land.
Well, good luck to you, and look on the wicking beds part of our site too, because that has some good options for people in water-starved areas where it really is good at conserving the water to the maximum degree.
Okay.
And so you can always come back with questions about that. I've set them up in my place, even though we don't have water shortages here. It's a great way to garden in a raised bed where you spend a lot less time watering.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
And Sarah was just asking, what's the Bokashi methods?
Oh, okay. So basically, here in Australia, it may be different depending on where you are. You can buy what are called Bokashi grains, which are just basically these microbes that are dried onto a grain. And then what you do is you have your kitchen caddy, and at the end of the day, you would open the lid and just scatter maybe a tablespoon of those grains onto the top surface, and then close the lid again. And that's it. And what'll happen is you do that every day at the end of the day after you've added your last food scraps. By the time it's full, that material will be sort of pre-digesting. It's a different process than the worm composting, but what it does is it keeps smells down. And as Wyanjime was saying in the beginning, when you have more food than maybe you can put into your new system, it would be a nice alternative way of composting, where once that caddy is full, then you could simply, if you have a yard, dig a little hole in the yard and bury it, and then it'll break down, and you could plant a plant on top of it, and it'll actually use it as fertilizer.
As long as there's no pests that come and dig it up like a dog.
Oh yes, that's true. You have to bury it deep enough. But
Yeah.
luckily, if it's been Bokashi, it should already be decomposing enough. As long as you're not adding meat scraps, that might be a bit too tempting for animal life. Raccoons and the like would probably go for it, but otherwise, a deeper hole is good.
Okay, so now Monica's asked about, for the mini, are 500 worms okay? The video's recommended 1,000.
I've thought about this, and to minimize any sort of stress, what you could do if you only have 500 worms is get a little plastic bin, keep them at a higher concentration, and feed them in that until you've actually grown the population up to 1,000. Then you're less likely to lose them. So my analogy is it's sort of like the ember starting a fire, where you have to be super careful at the beginning so the little ember doesn't go out. And by building it up a bit more, then it's a bit more resilient, and it'll stay lit, or in this case, the worms will be staying in your subpod. So one possibility is just a simple Rubbermaid or Tupperware container with some of that same bedding in it. Put your worms in that, your 500 worms in that, don't have to worry about the sides for that small number of worms, then just add a bit of food to that. And then just let that population grow up a bit, so till it's up to 1,000 or more, and then put it into the subpod. And I think you're more likely to have an easier transition rather
Okay.
than
And you could store that little container in the subpod.
or you could have it in your garage, any place comfortable. And that, ideally you want to give them temperatures that are optimal for them to grow them up as quickly as possible. So ideally something, I don't know if you're Celsius or Fahrenheit, but Celsius would be roughly in the teens to the high 20s, and Fahrenheit would be in the 50s up to about the low 80s or high 70s.
What we
So
like, basically.
Yeah, I'm
basically. In Southern California, and tomorrow it's going to
Okay.
be 90.
Okay, so do you have a place inside in a garage that's a bit cooler where you could
Oh,
store
yeah.
that? Okay, so this would be my advice is do that. And then, by the way, since you're in hot summer conditions now, is your subpod going to be in the shade or is it going to be in full sun?
It's on the east side.
Okay,
So it has morning shade, some afternoon sun.
okay. Well, just keep an eye, since the lid is brown. You might want to consider shading it in the hot time of the year. If it gets really cooking hot, 90s to 100 degrees or more, I guess it would. If it's only May and you're already in the 90s, it'll probably get hotter than that.
Yeah.
So there, when you're ready to put them into the subpod, come back to us. There's also some articles on our Grow Hub that give advice about providing a bit of shade if you live in a hot climate or you're in the hot summer months, and just to keep your worms happy. It's totally doable. We've had people in Dubai who keep their worms going, and that's serious heat over there. So, well, we have solutions for you.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Right, and then I think can be the last question we've got from Elka Wick. When can I add lemon, grapefruit, orange skins to my subpod? I have had the subpod now for a few months and it has not reached level 1 yet, though.
I would just use one peel at a time and cut it up into pieces and then see how it goes. Basically, what you'll see is it'll mold up on the surface. It'll have to break down a bit, and then they'll be able to break it down. But I actually have an article on the Grow Hub that if you produce a lot of citrus, what to do with that, because you'll ever only really be able to do a little bit of citrus in the subpod, say 2 or 3 citruses a week, even when it's going well. I wouldn't add more than that. But there are alternatives that work really well that do if you have a bit of yard space. But anyway, answering your question, experiment with taking, since you have been going for a little while, even though you don't have a lot of volume, start with half of a citrus peel and then chop it up and then stir that in, and that should be totally fine. The worms will avoid it if they're not ready to eat it, and there won't be so much that they flee the whole subpod with that quantity.
Yeah, look, I've got a subpod original and I throw in at least a lemon or a lime a week. I mean, I don't, do citrus, but it disappears.
Oh yeah. I think I do 2 or 3 typically in my classic in a week. I happen to have a lot of lemons and limes at the moment, so I'm juicing up 20 or 30 of them at a time, and so I put that into a cone composter that's been modified to be aerobic. So I have an article about cone composting. So if you like making fresh squeezed orange juice, where you might take 5 or 6 oranges at a time, then that's something you consider.
I'll have to have a look at that, because I make green smoothies every second day, which includes some citrus type fruit, as well as the bananas, which are good, aren't they? I put bananas in. They're okay, aren't they?
Yeah. Oh, they're totally fine. Worms love bananas, no question. Yeah,
but I haven't been putting any citrus in, so I'll have to look at those alternatives that you're talking about.
Yeah, you like Catherine said, you can add a couple in a week. and that'll be fine. But if you're having every other day, you're doing at least a citrus, then you'd have a bit more than you'd want to use. So if you look under composting in the Grow Hub, I have an article there that suggests a way to modify a cone system to make it actually work, without creating the smells and mess that you normally get from cone composting. That'll be
Thank
super
you.
easy, where you can dump all the citrus you want into that, and it'll be fine.
Great.
And also,
thanks,
look, just if you've
Nina.
got the Subpod original, I mean, just try putting it on one side. I mean, if the
Yeah.
worms don't like it, they'll head to the other side.
Yeah.
They'll get out of there.
I will do that. I'll start adding a little bit. Thanks.
Yeah.
Sure.
Great. Oh, well, thanks everyone. That was wonderful. That's 45 minutes, and I think that was a great session. So lovely to have you back in Zoom and where everyone can interact and to see your
Yes.
faces and hear your voices. It's wonderful.
It feels more like a community this way, which is
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. So thank you so much. We'll be doing another one same time next week. So if you can make it, it'd be great to see you. If you can't, just put your questions into the Grow Hub event. And happy International Compost Awareness Week, everyone. I hope you've been seeing some of the great lives that Peter Critcher's been doing too. There's I think Compostable Kate and him are doing one tomorrow, or is it later today? Anyway, keep an eye out on our Instagram account and in our emails. I think we shared all those events. So there's been some great lives going on. And great, Joan. Thanks from Arizona. Wonderful. So lovely to see you.
Do you have 1 second for me to dominate for?
Go ahead. Go for it. Jump in.
I'm going to say goodbye, but thank you, Peter and Catherine.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Elke.
So you're saying inside this tall bed
Yeah.
to layer up some pavers, put the Subpod so it's up here, and then fill the dirt around it.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this was not a good idea then. It sounds like it wasn't a good idea for me to get such a tall bed.
No, it's a good idea. So I, especially with the Hugo culture method, so it's ideal because what happens is I've got exactly one of your kinds of beds in my in my experiments, and you have those branchy layers at the bottom, so they'd be surrounding the pavers, and they'll provide a great long-term carbon source for that bed. And then just over time, you'll just be adding more soil as the soil levels subsides. This is fine because the Subpod will be stable. It'll stay at the right height, and you'll just pay attention to the holes on the side of the Subpod being revealed. So it'd be like receding gums. You want to.
Yeah. No, it just, like I said, I was trying to follow going, okay, well, I just want a taller bed. And it's like, it's like, well, wait a second here. You didn't put pavers down here. And so, okay, just clarify. Okay,
Yeah.
I get it. Pavers, I've got them. I'll do that, bed around, fill it, plant it, get some worms. I have to drive all just since you're from California, I have to drive all the way to Galt, which is an hour and a half away to get, if I want to get worms not mailed to me.
Wow, that's a I would be surprised there wouldn't be someone in closer around to you who's got them locally.
Oh, I've got some I've got some Oakland lady who charges like 8 times more than anybody else.
Okay.
I've got some on the coast that don't want to give to me because they got other commitments. I mean, it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny, but anyways, Galt has a really great pie shop. So there you go. Worms.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Hey, you
Sounds
guys
like
are great. You guys are great. Thank you so much.
Right. Have a great time with it.
Do you have a Lowe's or a Home Depot near you? Because
I do.
Armstrong Gardens has it, Home Depot has, and you have to kind of look around and see when they get them. They kind of come and go.
Yeah, so my Lowe's know, my Home Depot, and I even have a Summer Winds, and they usually, but not right now, they can't get any worms. It's like fascinating to me, you know, and I don't know if it's because, I mean, I don't have a clue. Bay Area people don't do worms. I mean, I don't know. It's just kind of a weird thing, but no worries. There's a place in New York that will mail them. But some of the reviews say arrived dead. And I'm like, no go. So anyways, thank you for letting me dominate. I
Sure.
completely.
Enjoy.
Tomorrow I'm setting it up and
Great.
I'm excited. So thank you guys.
Great.
And you'll see me back in the community. So
Great.
Wonderful. Thanks for
Thank you, guys.
joining us, everyone. Have
Bye-bye.
a great week.
You too.